Okay.
Oh, yeah, she's going to read copies.
Good evening and welcome to the Eden Prairie Planning Commission on Monday, February 9th, 2015. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, the first item on the Planning Commission meeting is the approval of the agenda. Commissioners, any comments on the agenda? If not, I'll welcome a motion.
So moved.
All, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Our next item is the review of the minutes from the meeting held on Monday, January 26, 2015. Does anybody have any comments relative to those minutes? If not, again, a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes of Monday, January 26.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Aye. Julie, I have to abstain.
As do I.
Okay. We have no public hearings today, and I think we're going straight to the planner's report on the TOD ordinance. So do I hand that to Regina or Julie or?
Mr. Chair, you can hand that directly to Regina, please.
Regina, take us through.
Hi, thank you, Chair Kirk and members of the Planning Commission. Probably about a year ago, we worked with our consultant, HKGI, started working on the draft transit-oriented development ordinance. And there were multiple stakeholder meetings, Planning Commission, City Council workshops, and today, in front of you, you have a kind of a final working draft, which was included in your packets, and there's also a red line copy of the latest changes that were made between the December meeting and today. I forgot the November one got canceled due to snow. So it's the most up-to-date draft ordinance that we have. However, as we came to a conclusion with the grant dollars and kind of finished out the grant, we still see as a staff that there's opportunities to make some changes to that draft ordinance. And as we continue, that's kind of why we're here tonight, just to ask additional questions and also to highlight the next steps in the process. So we're here to also help facilitate some discussion and request additional feedback. So the next steps, we are intending to hold additional stakeholder meetings on as soon as Wednesday from 4 to 5:30. We've invited the property owners from each of the 5 future light rail stations to attend to learn about the ordinance. If they have not been engaged in the past, we hope to bring more people in to hear their concerns, to obtain additional input and feedback. We also intend to reach out to the Urban Land Institute for their insight. They have this great program where they have a developers panel where they'll review your ordinance and give you kind of that real developers insight on your ordinance, not just the current property owners, but another set of eyes. So that's another kind of next step. We also intend simultaneously to make changes to our comprehensive plan in order to implement the zoning ordinance. The comprehensive guide plan needs to be in place on our map, and the language needs to be amended. So as we're working through the zoning public hearing process, to hopefully adopt the ordinance language, we intend to bring that forward as well. It can be up to a 6-month process with the Metropolitan Council, so that'll take some time to kind of merge the two together as far as timeline.
So just a quick question, if I might, on that process. So that would mean bringing the comp plan changes to the Planning Commission, then the City Council, then it would have to go to the Metropolitan Commission? Or Metropolitan Council?
And I should also invite Julie Klima to answer any questions, as well as Randy Newton, as we work through this presentation.
Sure, no problem.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, that is correct. The comprehensive plan amendment would have to go through Planning Commission and City Council review, and then ultimately would be submitted to the Metropolitan Council for their review and comment.
Hence the long time frame for the whole thing.
Mr. Chair, as well, the adjacent communities have the opportunity to review and comment, and though many communities will be provided the opportunity, and we hope take us up on the opportunity to waive additional comment, they can take up to 6 months if they so choose.
Okay, thank you.
So again, this kind of final step would be formal adoption of the TOD ordinance language. So tonight we have some specific questions to ask, and some of these questions may take some more time for you as a commission to think about and respond to. If you feel that you need additional time, whether it's providing a phone call or email or at a subsequent meeting, feel free and don't feel pressured to provide the information or comments to us right away. So our first question is, should the TOD ordinance limit height? So the current working draft has no limits on height. The language that we inserted was that if a developer comes in and they have the means to build, let's say, a 10-story building and they meet all of the requirements, they can. The challenges with that is that our sewer and water infrastructure may not be able to support that. That would be one concern. Another concern would be that traffic may be impacted. As a staff, this is something that we're evaluating, and think that perhaps by putting limitations on height may alleviate some of those issues that might arise. It also could give the city the opportunity to work with developers so that they, let's say they came in and we had maximums. We said maximum height of, or maximum stories of 5 stories. If they wanted to go to 7 stories, we could provide in our code maybe a menu of incentives. So if you wanted to increase the height requirement, if you implemented sustainable features such as solar panels and your building was going to be LEED certified, that perhaps that would be a reason to go up in height. So the thought would be, is that something that the Planning Commission would have interest in, or are you okay with not having a limit on height?
Commissioners, want to weigh in on this, or is this the way we want to work the process tonight, is discuss the questions a little bit and then go to the next one? And
So,
okay.
I think so.
So,
Well,
thoughts?
what would be the process for approving a 10-story building? How does, I'm unclear how that process works outside of this.
So if someone were to come in, they would propose to go higher, and we would want the developer to provide reasons why, and provide studies, whether it's a traffic study or a sewer and water study, to show that this could be done. And I guess the concern also is that we don't want the first developer in to take away all that capacity, all that sewer and water and traffic capacity. We want it to be equitable, I guess you could say. But it would be a process similar to any other process that comes in through the city. Developer submits an application, kind of goes through staff review, and based off of the criteria in the code, if staff felt it was something that we could support based off of not only the code but the policies that are in place through the comp plan and previous studies, then we would bring it to you and, let's say, recommend approval of the project. And I mean, it would be subjective from the Planning Commission standpoint and not, I guess, a by right approval. So you would have that latitude to decide if this was something that kind of met those goals and policies that are in place before you would recommend approval to City Council, for example.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, if I can dovetail on that, I would envision the process to be very similar to what is currently utilized through the PUD and site plan review process, public hearings at Planning Commission, public hearings at the City Council, with Council having the final vote on that.
In your conversations with other cities that are along the line, are they looking at the addressing the height concern is the same capacity that we are?
I don't know of another city that, a suburban type city that has a height limit. There may be national examples. I'm just not aware of anything locally. Something we can certainly continue to research.
I think it probably national level would be a better litmus test for that, just to see what has worked well within the given infrastructure that we have in place and what the forecasted infrastructure improvements are going to be necessary to be able to achieve this, the LRT expansion. So we might have to broaden the search into a national or maybe even international and other similar type suburban areas, tier 2 areas around the area, around the globe.
Great idea.
I have another question in regard to height. I'm not sure where I am on the question yet, but I think the suggestion that Commissioner Rickey made is one I talked to Ms. Klima about earlier, thinking I need to see this. Anyway, it's just that on page 7 of the original, or it's the second page of the staff report, and it's under subdivision 1 purposes. It talks about economically sustainable, and knowing that this all feels, that we're stepping off in a direction we haven't really yet had experience doing, the whole idea of trying to listen carefully to developers in this next go-around with the Urban Land Institute, to me, seems to be very hopefully helpful. I would certainly think it would be, but also just the question of, okay, the person comes in and gets the permission and the approval is done and they're up with a 10-story or 12-story building and we've managed it, but then what happens? Because there's more than just one building in those TOD areas, and there are multiple kinds of things that are going to need to take place for it all to be economically and hopefully environmentally sustainable. Mm-hmm. So I have more questions than I have answers right now, because I just don't know. If you go without limits, do you put your rest of your development at some juxtaposition which isn't going to be as easily managed as it would have been if you limited it at some point? But I don't know what that is.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, if I can step in. I just want to clarify some earlier points. At this point in the discussion, we wanted to touch back with you about the building height issue. I know that previously when Brad Shively from HKGI had been here and initially presented the idea of no maximum building height as part of the draft ordinance, that it raised some eyebrows of the planning commissioners as you sat behind the table, but as you continued to talk through the issue, there seemed to be a calming of the eyebrow raising, if you will. So we wanted to let you know that we identify at the staff level some challenges that occur with not identifying specific height maximums in the ordinance, and that we are continuing to look at those challenges and identify methods to address them. But we also wanted to give you the opportunity to weigh in if you had some additional concerns that you wanted to share with us as we continue those conversations, that we can take those concerns into account and move them forward as we continue to modify the ordinance for further review.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Looking at the various districts of the TOD or the draft TOD ordinance, what does our current infrastructure allow for knowing, like you got the MU and you got the R and the third district escapes me right now.
Employment.
Yeah. What does our current infrastructure allow, and how would that expansion, if we were to not have a minimum height or minimum floor requirement, how would that be able to be facilitated? That's a good question.
Yep, that's for you.
I think the quick perspective, my perspective would be a lot of the planning that we've done to date has assumed higher densities in the station areas, and that's what our past comp plan looked at. Additional, and I think when we did that check, we did have the resources to accommodate that higher density. This certainly has taken it to a next step, and so as we move forward, we'll have to continue to look at how much more density we can accommodate in those areas. But this is, I think, along the same lines of everything we have done to date in the city, the previous planning efforts we've done.
So we're on track with being able to keep up with the demand or the perceived demand of future developers wanting to build a 12-story and a 6-story and then a 10, all that. We're on track with being able to facilitate.
Yeah, I think we're on track with being able to facilitate some of that. With all the infrastructure, there is a limit, obviously, that we need to pay attention to. But I think in the within a small area, we do have the ability to take some of that extra density.
Gentlemen on this side, any other comments or questions? Opinions? Okay. I'll speak a little bit on my own personal opinion. I go back a ways on the Planning Commission, and I know there have been times when height has been a sensitive issue for the citizens, and I'm thinking back to Presbyterian Home and some things like that where it was pretty sensitive, and there were some people who weren't in favor of the height and the density that came with the height. Now, we all know that we're going to move more in that direction. But I would, and I don't know if there's any way to do this, but it builds on Regina's idea a little bit of, is there some way that we can look at a height guideline that is a very comfortable guideline for all of us, but allow review of, and potentially with the incentives like you mentioned, just to allow the process or send a signal to developers that we're open to a discussion of higher, more story, higher buildings, higher density, but it needs a higher level of review. And that's to address the infrastructure. I think the concern of using up the infrastructure too quickly. I don't know. I tend to be on the conservative side, so I was one of those raised eyebrows that Julie was talking about. But I don't think we can put our head in the sand and not at least consider, development ideas that would be, historically uncomfortable for the city because, things are changing. I don't know. Other comments?
Well, I instinctually want to say no height restrictions, so that didn't raise my eyebrows. I am sensitive now to the challenges of the infrastructure, so I don't know where the balance is with setting the height limit, or what height limit are we talking about, and how does the height limit correspond to density? So, if somebody wants to be tall but narrow, is that different than a large building that's more dense? How does that play with the infrastructure? Why is it height versus square footage?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I can speak to that a little bit. If you recall the purpose of the TOD ordinance or the TOD overlay areas, the purpose is to serve those areas most immediate to the transit areas. So where the city may have hundreds of acres that are guided for residential development or industrial or office development overall, the TOD area is going to be a very compact area, generally within a 10-minute walk shed or a 10-minute walkable area of that station. So we're not talking about vast acreages. We're talking about smaller areas where you're not going to have the opportunity to expand out as much as you're going to have the opportunity to expand up, which is why we're talking about those higher building heights, higher densities.
Well, and I was thinking about if it's a residential building, do you have 10 units on a floor, or do you have 5 units on a floor? That sort of density within the compact space, if that makes sense.
No, I think I hear what you're saying, and I was trying to get to that a little bit as well, of some sort of balance. How do we put something in there that allows us to intelligently judge the balance between density and height and the use of and the limitations of infrastructure? And I don't know if it's easy to put that in the ordinance and completely in black and white.
We appreciate your comments, and we certainly will take them into consideration as we continue to work through these issues.
On another note of balance, that was a good point you brought up that just dawned on me. Have we looked at what a profile of varied height buildings would look like from a distance of the track line itself and then looking down the track line, so horizontally across in both directions? Like if you have a 14-story right next to a 2-story, and that 2-story happens to have the solar panels and the 14 is on the south side of that, I mean, it's a private marketplace, so that's achievable, but have we looked at what the profiles might look like if you have both the height limiting factor, because then you're going to have all at the maximum capacity because you're going to want to maximize out the utility of that property, or if you have differing factors that might create a landscape breakup, might break the landscape a little bit.
In HKGI's draft, they've provided some building SketchUps to kind of give a feel of what that might look like. One of the suggestions that came out of a previous planning commission meeting was almost just to get out and experience development. And years back, we did a tour of various communities that had kind of mixed use and higher densities, so you could actually go out and feel what that might be like. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to put yourself in that place unless you've traveled or maybe one example is the town center area. Right now, we have apartment buildings, a water tower at Lincoln Park, some mixed use with like old Chicago, some office buildings. That's kind of the feel, along with Windsor Plaza. So if you haven't traveled or if you haven't gone to experience some of the other stations along the blue line or the green line, that might be just a local example of kind of the feel of what one of the future stations could look like, or even the Optum campus. That's a real life example of how an office development could feel next to a station.
But what I'm hearing relative to this issue, and if I can just maybe summarize in my own mind, I don't hear any hard over, we have to have height limits, or we're absolutely against any height limits. I hear kind of an openness to the issue and some desire to build some balance in some ways so that we allow for fair development and don't overstress the infrastructure too quickly. relatively fair summary from your guys' standpoint? Tough issue.
So next question.
Next question.
Should the TOD ordinance incorporate higher design standards? So currently today, we would, if we were to adopt this ordinance, let's say tomorrow, the architectural materials that would be permitted are the same as any commercial or office or industrial housing development would allow. So we would go back to our Chapter 11 of the City Code. We do talk about in the TOD ordinance about buildings step back. So if you're above a certain floor, that the building has to step back. We also talk about adding windows and kind of building breaks. But as far as architectural materials or really getting at design features, the ordinance doesn't really speak to that. For example, our town center ordinance has a set of design guidelines that go along with it. And that's the area where we want to create a real special place. And so do you feel that we should kind of go above and beyond in our TOD areas as well?
Any comments, opinions, thoughts?
I'll
Go
chime
for
in,
it,
I
Travis.
guess. A few years back, we vetted pretty extensively in ordinance or code changes and improvements to certain areas of the town center and the Golden Triangle area for exterior design. I think most all of us were maybe on that. So then maybe it was just you and I. now we're on that. And at that time, we had a lot of different samples. We had a lot of discussion around increasing the robust nature of the exterior materials, and then also what we wanted it to look like. So are we wanting to steer away from that which we've already implemented to create a new feel, or are we wanting to just blend the two together and utilize all the tools in our chest that we have presently to keep the innovation of the private sector coming forward with new ideas to us? I mean, that's the way I kind of see it.
I guess we're open to ideas, and we're really looking to you, as representatives of the community, as a commission. I don't know if Julie, if you wanted to add on.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, as the Commission is well aware, the staff and the City Council and the Planning Commission have been engaged over the past several months in conversations about design standards, specifically with regard to architecture, construction materials, landscaping, green features, things of that sort. So as those conversations continue, staff is continuing to take a look at and review and reach out to the Planning Commission and City Council to gauge how and if those standards should be adapted. In some places in the city, maybe in certain zoning districts, they should be improved or stretched a little beyond what they already allow for. In other areas, such as the TOD, we're asking if you would like to weigh in on, say, specific elements of that. Do you envision that we should have maybe some stronger standards with regard to landscaping in these areas? Maybe allow for a broader palette of items that would be considered credible or required landscaping materials. Do you want to see, right now the code provides for a 75-25% split between construction materials of, I'm going to call it Class A and Class B materials. Maybe in the town or TOD area, you look to increase that percentage to something, higher than 75-25. Staff is continuing to look at all of these issues as a part of the general design standards discussion, so we wanted to provide an opportunity for you to weigh in at this point. Again, we're not looking for a specific answer, just any general comments that you may have as we continue to work through the issues.
What would the city gain or lose by skewing the percentages that you just mentioned, the 75-25, and creating that higher standard? What would the city gain and the city lose for either direction.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I could answer to that. It's really driving at an aesthetic feel and experience for that specific area if that were applied in the TOD area or in other specific zoning districts. So we're looking to implement on the ground what it is the policymakers and the appointed officials like yourselves envision for the community to look like well into the future. So if you're looking for a higher architectural standard around these TOD areas, because we're going to see an increased number of riders and residents and folks enjoying these areas as the LRT comes into town, we'd like to see that incorporated into our ordinance.
I'd like to see higher standards of architecture in the TOD areas, and I think that that's the whole point, is that we want people to be attracted to those areas. I mean, I guess the downside is that people won't want to come in here and build because it'll be more expensive to build, but the idea would be that people want to use the light rail and live near the light rail and shop near the light rail, and in order to do that, there has to be some traction. And if we can do that through higher architectural standards and landscaping standards, I think that we should.
I think I have, again, a personal opinion that's similar to that. I would like to see us utilize the highest level standards that we have, and I think that is the town center design standards right now, that we looked and said, we want this town center to represent, you know, a kind of a cool or unique or special part of Eden Prairie, and yet still have the look of the city. You know, that's why I wouldn't change too much in the sense of the 75-25 and things like that, because frankly, I'd like people to, you know, when they come into Eden Prairie to understand they're coming into Eden Prairie, but put our best foot forward with that, and use the, you know, whatever we think is the highest level standards that we have in the city, but have that be a consistent look with, you know, the Eden Prairie look. And so I think I'm saying a similar thing as you did, but I'd like people to know they're coming into Eden Prairie. My other comment on that is, you emphasized earlier, and I think we need to keep in mind that this is going to be very pedestrian oriented. So there's going to be a lot of people walking, and if there are design standards that we need to put, or landscaping standards that are more unique to a highly utilized pedestrian area as opposed to some of the other development we have in the community, I guess I'd like to see that. I think that could be a little change for us.
Thank you.
To that point, how much of the bicycle and pedestrian plan that just came across our desk and was approved by council, I'm assuming it was approved by council, how much of that could we easily be incorporated without doing a lot of changing to that plan, or incorporating our own within this? How much can we just kind of staple that to this?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, the bike and pedestrian plan that was reviewed by the Planning Commission and City Council talks to accessibility and connectivity and safety measures. The TOD ordinance and the question we're kind of driving at right now relates more to aesthetics, and the bike and ped plan really didn't address aesthetics of those areas, but rather, as I said, connectivity and safety, making sure that folks had a place of refuge if they're crossing a very wide expanse of roadway, or providing the necessary signals, if you will, so that motorists know that it is a pedestrian crossing area. So we're kind of looking at two different aspects of the same animal.
I agree with using the higher standards. I'm just wondering, would we apply, or are we considering applying the higher standards to all the districts? Because I would think you'd have higher standard at the MU and the R, and maybe more of our standards, if that's right, in the employment areas. So I agree with the higher material. I just think that maybe break it up among the districts.
Good comment.
And actually, could I ask one other question along those lines? So the mixed use, we encourage high density, but so there's we can't really enforce it. We're just, so if you didn't want to build high density in the mixed use, you could then just build residential.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there are 3 sub-districts in the TOD draft ordinance. One is mixed use, which is intended to provide for either a mix of office and retail, or retail and residential, or office and residential, something of that sort. The TOD residential district is intended to provide for residential development opportunities, and then the TOD employment area is intended to provide just that, light industrial, office types of areas. So as you can see in the draft ordinance, there are bulk and dimension standards that are proposed within each of those zoning districts. So you'd take a sub-districts rather. So you'd take a look at what the intent of that sub-district is, and looking at the bulk and dimension requirements that are recommended through the ordinance. So there'd be a little bit of review as mixed use came in to see where it is most appropriately located. Later on in Regina's presentation, she's going to want to discuss with you about where the TOD generally is intended to be implemented on the ground. At this point, staff is still continuing to work through that issue as well, and through the comp planning process, we'd be looking to identify within the TOD area which of those would be identified for each of the sub-districts, so that would be clearly communicated to the development community up front, and that the city would have a clear expectation of what and where development would occur.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments on the higher design standards question?
Just one, and maybe in contrast, in thinking about the higher architectural standards, I think that it's more important in the E district, because that's where you have the least incentive to have nicer buildings. So there's actually an incentive close by the stations to, without any ordinance, to make a nicer building to attract residents or businesses. But as you get out in the employment areas, when you have the warehouse type businesses, there's less of an incentive to spruce up the building.
Okay. Anybody else? Shall we go on to question number 3?
Okay. So I'm going to show you a series of maps. And so as you look at the maps, think about how the TOD ordinance could apply to the general areas. So just to refresh your memory, or to our viewing audience, the 5 proposed stations are highlighted here: City West, Golden Triangle, Town Center, Southwest Station, and Mitchell Road. And before you, I'm sorry. You're not. Some technical difficulties. Version.
We're just checking to see if we can get the maps up on the screen.
Well, while they're doing that, to the last point, while he's trying to get that to work, something that just came up into my mind was that the upper floor step back. And I know that I think there was some conversation way early on in the workshop, council planning workshop, on the implementation of that, and then how high would we want to have it. And so I see that we've got above 4 floors, and I guess that's assuming a standard floor, right? But what if you've got there's a lot of what ifs. I'm not certain if we want to limit it to a certain floor, because you might have a restaurant, and there's several of them that have multiple floors, and then they want to utilize that top floor, but they just don't have the restaurant capacity to be able to facilitate another floor before they can have something outside on a deck. So do we want to be ironclad on floors? Do we want to be more or less kind of a foot, use a foot as a benchmark, or do we want to kind of keep it limbo or something?
And that might be another opportunity where we, similar to height, where maybe we do have a cap and then allow that flexibility as developers or property owners come in and have that evaluated a little closer through Planning Commission and City Council.
So that's something that would be part of the the PUD process within the TOD or districts.
It could be. Looks
Okay.
like our maps are
Yep, we got
up
maps
on the
now.
screen. All right. So to refresh everyone's memory where the alignment goes and where the 5 future stations are located in context with some of the surrounding area. I just wanted to bring your attention to the our current guide plan map, and if you can see, each station is highlighted with a yellow star, and the areas around it are quite different. We have City West, which is mostly office, some residential and some commercial within a walkable area. Then we have our Golden Triangle Station area, which is primarily industrial. We have our town center location, which is surrounded by town center, and then our major center area, which has commercial, your regional commercial type use. Southwest Station, which is pretty built out. There may be opportunity for additional development. However, we have the park to the south and some already transit-oriented housing nearby. And then we have Mitchell Station, which is industrial in nature, right here, city center. Switching to the zoning map, again, to kind of give you a feel of the surrounding area and context, office, industrial, with Golden Triangle. Town center, we have a mix of industrial and commercial. Also, some of our commercial allows for mixed use, so that's why you'll see the pink commercial color, but that's where Lincoln Park and the water tower are located. We have Southwest Station, which commercial, residential, and then industrial zoning around the Mitchell Station. In the draft ordinance, we talk about the applicability of the ordinance, and we talk about the 10-minute walk shed. So many transit-oriented development ordinances talk about a half-mile radius, and through working through the transitional stationary action plans or the investment framework that the Planning Commission is familiar with, they decided to drill down and look at the what's called the 10-minute walk shed, how far a person could walk within 10 minutes from the station location. So this gray area surrounding the station location is the current 10-minute walk shed area. The yellow area is after sidewalk improvements and road improvements are made, and that's where we envision that this ordinance would be applicable. Now, talking as a staff and really looking at these areas, we think that some of the area, the yellow area, may be stretched, and in some areas we may want to shrink the applicability. For example, Mitchell Station is a great example. Where south of Scenic Heights Road, we have single-family residential. There's some twin homes in this area as well. I think some maybe quad homes. But at this time, staff doesn't envision the TOD ordinance applying to this area. There's other areas where we think it could be stretched For example, the industrial buildings just off of Wallace Road. We could potentially stretch it to this area. I can move along through each station. Southwest Station may be hard to see, but existing is the gray, and with the improvements adds on the little piece of yellow. However, north of Plaza Drive, we'd envision that we stretch this so that it doesn't cross over property, so it doesn't cut a building in half, so your entire property, the TOD ordinance would apply. Town center, station area, we envision that, again, we could stretch some areas just east of Den Road, also Presbyterian Homes area and Lifetime to the west of Prairie Center Drive, and the office building west of Prairie Center Drive, that we could also stretch it towards that area. The mall, maybe there's potential there as well. Golden Triangle Station area. We don't envision stretching the applicability area west of 212. See that as a major barrier. However, we could stretch it east of Shady Oak Road, north of Valley View, down here in this area. And then City West Station, the idea would be to stretch it further south and also include all properties to the west of, the east of Shady Oak Road. So really it would be stretched down here. We don't want to touch Minnetonka to the north. So the question again, should the TOD ordinance apply to the general areas described in the draft ordinance?
Since the southwest and the town center area is so close in proximity, what is the overlap, or do you have a double map that you'll be able to see where the circles overlap and where the improved yellow shaded areas overlap, and if we can just kind of make one big bubble there?
Unfortunately, in this presentation, I do not have one that overlaps. However, I can say it's generally this area right here. I don't know if you can see my arrow moving, is where there is overlap.
So when we stretch and contract the various size and shape of where we, the application and the land use, would there be a benefit to looking at streets as being a delineating factor, or would it be more advantageous to look at some other indicator, or some other feature to be able to, maybe public, or, go around the public park as opposed to cut through it? I mean, what kind of thought process, or what kind of thought did staff have with that?
We have looked at geographic boundaries and barriers, as well as kind of the cutoff point. However, current language in the draft ordinance talks about the flexibility of, if it's on the cusp, that someone could make a request to change the zoning or the guide plan if it's not covered in the guide plan, so that they could make their case, make that request to Planning Commission and Council, and potentially be approved. So we do want to allow that capability. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm just seeing if anybody else had any comments on that.
as usual, I have an opinion on it. I think it makes perfect sense to utilize what we know about the community. And, I live, the Mitchell Station is, I don't live right in that neighborhood, but that's very close to my area. And the delineation that you made there makes perfect sense. South of Scenic Heights just doesn't make sense to be under a transit-oriented ordinance. So I think we really should, I mean, this one to me I have a pretty strong opinion about. We really should use the intelligence of what we know about the community. And to me, the 10-minute walk or the half mile or whatever, those are guidelines. And we need to kind of mold those guidelines into what makes sense for what's around those stations. And I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping a little flexibility in there to say, if somebody's very close to that, to give the staff, planning commission, and council some flexibility to deal with that. But I think, if we drew I know you didn't do this, but if we just drew a circle and said, everything inside that circle, we know too much about the community to do that. So I would encourage staff to look at that and, from my opinion, and make recommendations, and let the planning commission then review those recommendations when we get to that point. But definitely do it.
When looking at that, maybe it'd be advantageous to have another overlay or map, or be able to identify the business, because the business community is going to be looking at this a little more in depth than the residential community, those that are residents, because they're looking at the profit side of LRT coming to Eden Prairie. So because I saw a lot of properties that were being cut in half, and you made mention of it, that it doesn't make sense, especially in the GCA area. It doesn't make sense to have them just cut in half. We'll just include it. Well, to what end are we going to include? It would be nice to see what the feedback from the business community are, especially in the heavy industrial and the town center area and the GTA and up by UHG, to see what their thoughts are, if they would want to be involved, if they were going to be included in the in the district area, what kind of features they'd like to see, that kind of thing.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this evening the staff is not asking the Commission to weigh in either in a bubble area or a parcel by parcel basis. Rather, we're wanting to alert you to the fact that these are conversations that we're having. These are things that we're looking at a staff level, to let you know where we're moving forward in our conversations, and letting you know these are ideas that we're wrestling with at this point, and just allow you the opportunity if you have some specific comments. But we're not expecting you to be weighing in on parcel by parcel or general area. More commenting along the lines of the principle of where we're headed with our conversations.
I think it's great that you're looking into this early in the realm of things. I think the business community would be advantageous for your research. You'd probably even do half of it for you, so they'd let you know.
I again just strongly support the idea of what you're doing, and I agree. Right now, long way before we need to start micromanaging that process. So, but I fully support that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the questions that came up in a previous Planning Commission meeting was, how is this different from the current town center ordinance that we have in place now? There's certainly a lot of similarities, but how is it different? So we took some time to highlight some of those differences for you today. So both areas are envisioned to be a very compact, walkable, attractive, pedestrian-oriented area. However, the TOD ordinance would be specific to future light rail stations. The town center area is specific to the town center area that's identified in the major center area study. Also, on the ground as far as in the comp plan, and the ordinance is ready to be implemented when someone comes in to redevelop. The TOD ordinance currently as drafted allows for higher densities than the town center ordinance, especially as you saw with the no limit on heights that would allow for those higher densities. The town center area does allow higher densities than your typical zoning district, but again, lower than POD. There's currently no height maximums for the TOD MU, mixed use, and there are no height maximums for the TOD employment. There are height maximums or story maximums for the residential area. In the town center, there's height maximums for all subdistricts. TOD ordinance has an employment subdistrict, which allows for things like research and development, light manufacturing, some office. The town center doesn't have an explicit employment subdistrict. They do, however, have a commercial subdistrict which allows for retail services, entertainment, hotel type uses. The TOD ordinance has a bike parking standard, which is something that we're looking at to see if it's the right number. The TOD ordinance also has a travel demand management plan requirement for any office buildings that are proposed to help manage that traffic impact that could occur. And it also has an expanded usable open space requirement. So plaza requirements, private open space requirements within a development or within a mixed use or residential area. A difference with the town center ordinance that we highlighted earlier in the presentation is that it has specific town center design guidelines with examples, and it's color rich with pictures, and it has really specific guidelines that we can hand to a developer, and they can really see our expectations. So, I also want to highlight where the town center area on the ground is applicable compared to the TOD, where the TOD ordinance would be applicable. So again, the yellow area is a 10-minute walk shed. As we talked earlier, we envision that this could be stretched or overlapped with Southwest Station TOD area. However, the question is, do we really need the TOD ordinance here, or is the town center ordinance enough? Does it get at that kind of special place that we envision as a community without having to go above and beyond with the town center ordinance, or with the TOD ordinance, sorry. I think Julie wants to add some additional comments.
I'm sorry, could you just go back to the comparison? Well, thanks.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, if you'll recall when Brad Shively from HKGI was here on one of the previous occasions, he talked about the fact that HKGI and staff were discussing the issue of whether or not in the town center area the TOD ordinance or the town center should apply. And as you can see by the following slide that Regina had, where she identifies the yellow area is the 10-minute walk shed where generally the TOD ordinance would be expected to be applied, and the area identified as orange is the town center area that's already in place in our comprehensive plan, and the zoning district language is in the zoning code, so it is applicable today. So there's discussion at an internal level whether or not we implement one or both of these and how to intermingle the two, get the two to merge for the best possible aesthetic development and experience for the pedestrian. So we wanted to bring that issue forward to you as well if you had any comments or concerns that you wish to share with us on that. Otherwise, we will continue to work through that test ourselves.
Comments? Thoughts?
I think one ordinance would be nice for developers and staff alike, right? So, I guess, take the most stringent one? No, I don't know. I think it'd be nice to figure out one policy, just blending the two, capture the spirit of them, what they're supposed to be.
So you're suggesting perhaps the town center area and the TOD ordinance that would encompass the TOD ordinance for all 5 stations. We'd blend the TCA and the TOD into this one subset, one station? Kinda?
Just for this station.
Just for this station?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree with that for this station, and personally, I think if the decision were left up to me, I would say the town center is really the dominant thing that we want, and if we had to expand that ordinance a little bit to take into account, some specific transit issues, I would do that. But I personally think, we kind of envision that as the center of Eden Prairie, and spend a lot of time and effort envisioning that and putting it in the comprehensive plan. So I personally think that would be should be the dominant focus of that area. Now, as for when we look up at the comparisons here, obviously to make it life easier for everybody, any place where we can make the town center ordinance and the TOD as consistent as possible would be smart. And I'm sure you're looking at that right now, and only make them different where the transit drives a real difference in why we need to do it. Hence, the higher densities. If we want higher densities in the transit-oriented areas outside of that town center transit area in the other 4, then we've got to make the ordinance consistent with that. I don't know. Is that clear? Is that understandable?
Mr.
Kind
Chair,
of.
Very understandable. Thank you.
I think we just have to reconcile the no height maximums, right? Compared to height maximums. I wasn't privy to the conversation with the town center why there was a height maximum placed on it.
This kind of comes back to the second question on incorporating higher standards. And if we have, so right now the TCA is a subset of the geographic area that encompasses the TOD potential. And especially if we expand the TOD potential into, like you were saying earlier, into specific delineation markers. And so if we've got, if we're trying to achieve a higher design standard in the TOD ordinances, that would kind of be where we'd be leaning towards in the TCA. It just happens to be a larger area now, and now we'll just encompass a greater amount of square mileage.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I can answer from my perspective your question on why no height limits versus height limits. I think when we were talking about the town center, we recognized that the density level in the town center was going to be higher than most of the rest of Eden Prairie. And my belief is, or my understanding is, that we're now saying, okay, now that we're doing these transit-oriented areas, we perceive the density being higher yet. Another, if there's density level A in most of Eden Prairie, density level B in the town center, we're now going to a density level C potentially in the transit-oriented areas. And I think that's why the discussion is around taking off the height limits and allowing even more density. Is that, that's my opinion. Is that representative of others' perspectives, or?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, at the time that the town center zoning district and regulation design guidelines rather were implemented, I can't really speak to how much consideration was taken into account for the transit because the final alignment had not yet been determined through that area, so that it was a general discussion topic, but it wasn't finally decided, or a design was not identified. So now that that has been identified, we have the opportunity to take a look at not only the other 4 station areas, but the town center area as well, now that we have more of an idea of exactly where that station is going to land and the development that is likely to occur around it, and how we want to see that develop in the future. So we're here just asking for some general guidance on some of these issues, and looking for any comments that you might have.
I guess following this discussion earlier about not wanting to be too restrictive with the height maximums, I guess I would feel the same with the town center, unless, why not review opening that up?
I don't fear, but I can see that there might be a decision that developers would have in the city of Eden Prairie. So they want to be in Eden Prairie. That's where they want to do some developing. And then if they come to the town center area and it's got a much more stringent requirements, they might say, well, we can get out of the town center and go right next door to the southwest area and do our development there. And we're privy to less restrictions. And so I don't want to see interstation within our city having them make those decisions from one station to the next, especially with the Southwest and the TCA so close to each other.
Yeah, so just, you're saying make them all consistent, correct?
I would say, yeah, I would make them all consistent, yeah.
I'm kind of leaning that way, too.
Which way?
I think the town center is the stake in the ground right now, in my opinion. I mean, it's the one that, it is an ordinance as it stands right now.
But then that would be applying height maximums to all stations.
No, but I think your point is actually, I like your point of, because I was kind of picturing, as I said, multiple density areas, and maybe we just say, no, there's going to be a density area around transit and the town center. We'll expect a higher density in those areas, hence allowing higher development, and really apply that across the board. That's an interesting idea. It's kind of hard to argue with, to be honest. So,
on the height factor on the TODR, did I miss something that you said that there was a height maximum?
Yes, it's, I believe it's 20 stories.
So I must be skipping right over it with my eyes then.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, in the draft that I have before me, and I'm utilizing the red line copy that I believe was at your table this evening, I don't see a building height maximum. I see a building height minimum.
So as it stands right now, we do not have any building height maximums in any of the sub-districts then?
In its draft form,
in its draft form, yeah.
Yes.
In its draft form. Then I guess I was a little mistaken there. I thought that we had the restrictions on the residential, so I'm sorry. It was backwards in my mind, maybe.
well, maybe an explanation, and again, this is dredging back into my memory. I think when we were discussing the town center area, there was probably a little more sensitivity to height than I think we're seeing evolve now because of transit. I think transit, and I'm pretty sure that when we were looking at the town center area, I don't even think we envisioned necessarily a station. I don't know, Janet, maybe you know, but I don't remember envisioning a station in that area at all. At least I don't remember a significant discussion about that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we actually have adopted into our comprehensive plan the station location pretty much as it wound up, kind of behind Brunswick. What we weren't 100% clear is what roads basically the project would pay for to access the station. And, you know, our goal was the north-south roadway being a very critical connection, and the project is actually utilizing the east-west connection through Eden Road. So that's one of the differences, is kind of the access to the station initially and, you know, how that's all worked out. But that was the preferred location from the city's part as we went through the major center area study and also adopted into our comp plan. So considering the town center, and you'll notice that the town center station where it's currently located is really central, you know, to how that was all configured initially, because that was the thinking. And then we did have kind of a fallback if that didn't work out.
Okay.
And then we looked at a third alternative as we went through kind of the more detailed preliminary engineering process and talking to stakeholders and consultants who, you know, saw the value of maybe trying to get it a little closer to the mall if possible, and different considerations. But one thing that I wanted to point out with regard to your considerations of density and height limits, and even things like floor area ratio, which is more how you would configure how much is ground floor space versus, you know, height. You could just use more of a bulk kind of a measurement. It's called floor area ratio. But when you're thinking about that, and I heard a little bit before of kind of looking at more from the capacity perspective, that's really what we did in the town center initially. And we came up with kind of some base criteria that we didn't want to see the development interfere with. And one of those was the width of the roadways. We didn't want to see Prairie Center Drive or Flying Cloud Drive get any wider and less walkable than they are today. And we rather wanted to see more street calming and pedestrian crossing features and narrow down the lanes and try to get more streetscape and those kinds of things in. But that was kind of a sacred cow, if you will. You know, we really didn't want to explode the road. So the capacity that's created in the town center is done so by creating more of a grid and providing opportunities for people to bypass congested areas and go in different directions, whereas right now the traffic kind of funnels to a few major intersections. So that is the intent. So the capacity is related to getting some of those street connections done. And the height is actually limited to 8 stories in the town center because floor area ratio, the density, was backed into based on the traffic capacity, basically. And we kind of mapped out where that would be and everything like that. And then the developers came in and asked for more right off the bat. Windsor Plaza was higher density. Presbyterian Homes is outside of the town center area, as you can see. And they requested and received 13 stories. So we have to keep revisiting that and making sure that the roads don't explode, basically. And I think these are some of the challenges that we see with just having, you know, no limits and having to always try to consider all of those factors. And I think it's also what kind of led us to, we really need to look at this more on the ground and the comprehensive plan, exactly where we want to have this type of density, and then whether it really, you know, makes sense to potentially allow no limit. Also, if you have no limit, it's hard to have incentive types of discussions and negotiations with developers to kind of get some quid pro quo for the city, and whether it's water conservation or whether it's a higher aesthetic, public art, whatever it might be, we'd have more leverage. So these are some of the things we thought about. But just so you know, we did have that limit in the town center, particularly because of those goals and making sure that it remained walkable and that we improved that as possible.
Thank you for clarifying that. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
It was helpful. Thank you.
Well, we've based around a lot of ideas. Any other comments we want to add to that one? Next.
So one last question or discussion item that we have for you tonight is when we reached out to the Chamber of Commerce Government Committee, they're kind of a sampling of businesses that we hear from in our community, and one of their greatest concerns that they brought up was the impact to existing property owners and how this ordinance would potentially affect those existing businesses and properties. We do want to be as sensitive as we can as the area develops from today till when the line is built to 10, 15 years into the future. And we do definitely have an ear to those business owners and property owners. And so we want to get feedback from you as a commission. If you have any concerns or ideas in regards to this discussion point. So open it up there.
Do we run into this issue when the town center ordinance was put in place? And how do we handle it in that case?
So one of the examples would be the Walmart property. And I don't know if Janet's still here, if she wants to speak to it, but they were kind of in a transition point when I believe when the ordinance was approved, and they wanted to make some modifications to their exterior. They wanted to do a facade remodel, and staff worked with Walmart to allow them to make improvements to their property. And we did receive within the Walmart development elements of the town center ordinance, benches, kind of planter box areas, an increased design, some sustainable features, porous pavement. They also are contributing to a special services district. So those are things that we were able to work with them on, not necessarily apply the ordinance 100%. However, we're able to negotiate and work with them through their modification. And Janet could probably answer more detailed comments or questions about that or other examples.
Yeah, is it fair to say we moved them in the direction of the ordinance without a strict, you have to do this, 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 and so there was some meeting in the middle, I think, a little bit relative
Correct.
to that.
Kind of seems like that's the right approach to take in this case, I would think.
This discussion this evening that you just raised with us is applicable to all of the districts that we'd be using.
It would be.
So not just city center, this would be in all those areas where we have ongoing businesses and other concerns.
Definitely.
That are already in place and operating. And obviously at some point we'll hear, if we had a TOD in place, that they are going to struggle to be able to adjust their idea of where their future lies with what the TOD now would require them to do. That's the nub of the thing that I hear from what you're saying.
It may have impacts, however, it may provide opportunity as well to a potential property owner. So there could be, pluses and minuses. However, I think traditionally as a city we've been flexible and definitely willing to work with our businesses and property owners, our residents, our homeowners. And so I envision that we would continue to do that.
At what point does the new language of the ordinance apply to individual interest owners when they come forward for it? Is it remodel, refurbish, or is it a complete tear down and redevelop? At what point would we apply the new standards?
That's a great question, and something that we're bound by state statute and the non-conforming ordinance that's in place. However, that's something that we we need to look at as a staff and how to incorporate that flexibility into the ordinance, because it's not really strong right now in the working draft.
I'm just leaning in to listen.
I would be cautious in making too much strength in the language of the ordinance to require interest owners that are really not wanting to do something right away to actually have to do it. You know, especially the residential, and it sounds as though perhaps that the Mitchell Crossing station, the south of the Scenic Heights, might be eliminated entirely from that, which would be under the TOD ordinance. But residential neighborhood area, they might be a little bit less cautious, or a little more cautious, a little less wanting to be a part of that new ordinance standards, as opposed to some businesses that are looking at it for a potential gain and then increasing their land valuation.
Other comments? I think I'm with my colleagues here on saying I think we ought to keep a reasonable level of flexibility in how we enforce it. I don't think we want to drive existing property owners either out of the area or drive them nuts with if they want to make minor changes. But on the other hand, I think like Walmart, I think that's an excellent example of having a little bit of leverage to move in the direction we want to go without doing that in a way that's unreasonable for an existing business owner.
Thank you. So at this point, if you have any additional questions or ideas, we're certainly welcome to those. And again, as I said earlier, if you think of something, or if you want to call us or email us with something you thought of, feel free. If you wanted to attend the stakeholder open house on Wednesday, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
And that is Wednesday at
4 p.m.
4 p.m. And is that here? Or
downstairs in our heritage
downstairs
rooms.
Okay. So if anybody does want to attend, please feel free. Do we have any other comments or ideas or questions around transit-oriented development right now?
I just have one that hasn't come up at all yet, and I'm not sure how it will, but the whole question of visitor parking in residential areas, one of the thoughts that I had is in an area of high density over, for instance, in Hennepin Village, which is a neighborhood right next to mine. It has always been an issue that there aren't very many visitor parking areas anywhere in that area. So if you have a gathering, a social gathering in the holidays or a graduation party and so forth, sometimes it works out because we can use one of the common buildings, but there's only one. And if you double book it, that doesn't work. So my point is that seems to be an area of livability for the folks that are going to be in those high density areas. And the management of it is more the issue than the fact that it exists. It very well may need to exist, limits on visitor parking, and particularly because people could take the transit to there and then they'd be all set. I get that. But that's an adjustment that folks moving in need to kind of recognize or somehow know if that's where it develops in that direction. The other direction is there any other method that folks have not yet, but may find in the future might work more simply than, for instance, in the circumstances that I've seen, you have to go ahead early on and ask for applicable spaces to be available, and then somebody else, of course, who doesn't think of it as soon, runs out and they don't have the opportunity because they waited too long and somebody else was able to get there first. It's just a livability issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, ideas? We're idea'd out tonight?
Well, when's the next time that we might see something like this come forward in front of us?
So we want to make sure that we get the feedback from the property owners, and I would like to get the feedback also from a developers forum. And at that point, I believe you'll have another opportunity to review the ordinance, probably not till the end of March or April, before we see another version.
Okay. I know that, I can't speak for him, but Commissioner Frank, he asked the question of vision, what the vision is that the city sees for these various areas. And so I just want to know that we would have another opportunity before too long, because I know that there's other members of the commission here that aren't here tonight that get a stab at it too.
We'll have more opportunities.
Okay. So we're looking a month or 8 weeks out anyway, maybe a little longer, and we'll have another opportunity. Okay. Anything else from a planner's report standpoint?
Mr. Chairman, no.
Thank you. Any members' reports? Continuing business? New business? If not, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.